In this lesson, we're going to talk about what it really takes to get to closing. What is it that you're going to need in order to effectively present yourself to the market? It is my hypothesis that you would be well served to have a minimum viable finance offer, something that you're comfortable with, something you believe is reasonable and in the ballpark as a talking point. You definitely are going to need to have the basic marketing materials, which is going to be the one pager. Now, the one pager sometimes is 2 pages. I know that's kind of weird, but everybody calls it the one pager. You are going to need a PowerPoint pitch deck, preferably 10, no more than say 15 slides that you can present in less than 20 minutes, preferably 10, 15 minutes. You really need to power through that. You should have a 3-paragraph written synopsis that you can use to tee up the meeting with an email. You should also have a video, a 3 to 5 minute professionally produced video, something that's pretty compelling that can tell the story. You should also have a post-meeting follow-up. So some kind of a short synopsis, a 1-page, these are the next steps to continue the discussion or to close the deal in a best case scenario. You need to have a strategic action plan. You need to have a CRM system because you're going to be talking to a lot of people. You need to be able to effectively sort them and rank them and move them through a pipeline. So those are the basic toolkit. Obviously, you might decide you want to have a few more things. I think it's hard to be effective if you have anything less than what I just described. In addition to the toolkit, maybe the most important thing is the mindset. How committed are you to doing what it takes to get this done? It's very time consuming. It's not a walk in the park. It requires a lot of focus. It probably is going to require travel, unless you live in one of the tech centers where they have access, or financial centers where they have access to deep pools of capital. It has been my experience that you probably will need to take this on the road. You need to be willing to do that, especially if the profile of the investors that are your ideal investors actually live in a different place. You can't expect them to come to you. You need to go to them. You should invest in high definition video conferencing capabilities. If you do that, you can get a lot done, frankly, over the phone. But video conferencing is quite important with screen sharing. You need to invest in a team. And if you're serious about trying to raise real amounts of capital, in addition to getting your house in order, you should have a professional team that's experienced in the type of financing. That includes a securities lawyer. So realistically, in addition to investing your own time, you need to invest upfront in getting the right professional advisors, and some of them aren't cheap, and all of the other kit and equipment to enable you to be successful. So think of it as if you're going to climb Everest, you need the kit, you need the team, and it's going to be a journey. It's going to take some time, and it's not easy. So capital raising is a little bit like hunting and fishing. Personally, I fish, but I don't hunt. So I'm going to use, for purposes of this discussion, the fishing analogy. And what I've learned about fishing is you fish where the fish are. I have found that when I go fishing in places where there are no fish, I come home empty-handed. And so if you want to improve the probabilities of catching the fish that you're trying to catch, so let's stick with this profile, you need to first know where they are. So you need to research, okay, if I'm looking for a particular source of capital, then you got to figure out where are those people? And then you got to figure out, okay, if that's where they are, how am I going to access them? Now, in terms of who you want to go after, visualization is something that a lot of athletes use to visualize success. it can be used in this context. So if you visualize yourself and say, if I had my pick of anyone in the whole world who would be my partner, my financial partner, who would provide this capital, who would it be? And then start to say, okay, who is most like that person? And how can I sort of navigate through and hopefully find somebody who, even if they aren't the ideal person, the rock star Hollywood A-lister, maybe there's somebody who actually isn't that dissimilar, but maybe on a more local level. I've found that's a pretty good way to try and target your ideal investors. This is where having an advisory board help you. And if it turns out that that there are particular species of fish, sticking with that, and that there are people within your group of mentors or advisors that swim with those fish, then maybe it makes sense to form an advisory board and start to present, your dream, your vision, your pitch deck, and present what you think is a compelling offer. And if there's trust in the room and among the board, people will probably tell you whether or not what you're pitching is real or whether it's going to get traction. So you're a lot better off within that environment to practice the pitch and to build confidence and credibility before you go out and actually start to pitch it to your best prospects. Now, in terms of how you figure out how to source these leads and get qualified leads, for purposes of this lesson, to a certain extent, I don't have a one-size-fits-all answer or advice because it's going to depend on who it is that you're trying to target. But in general, this isn't rocket science. This is just like any sales and marketing exercise. So if you imagine yourself trying to sell a product or a service to your target customer, then ask yourself, how am I going to target those people? In this case, you are selling a product. You're selling the company and the company's equity or debt securities. That's a product. And so the way you do it is you do it the old-fashioned way. You go to databases, you use LinkedIn, you join relevant trade associations where those people participate. You write a blog, you build a social media presence, you ask your advisors, the professional advisors who work for you, and say, hey, can you introduce me to the right people? So it's not about just getting on a plane and going to conferences and hanging out and hoping that you might meet someone, although it's possible that you might. It's about being much more strategic at figuring out how to get in front of the most fish that are the kind of fish that you're fishing for, and presenting your story. So the best people that I've met who are good at fundraising are always ready. Whether they're on a plane and they happen to meet somebody, they can give that 30-second pitch, see if there's any traction there. And if there is, they can move into, say, a 5 or a 10-minute, not in an annoying way, but in a, hey, I'm passionate about my project and I'm always looking for people that can help me. So that's how you build momentum. And frankly, it's a numbers game. So where else, for people who like startups, and let's be honest, it's a certain breed of people that like startups. You got to be a little bit crazy to do it. You got to be crazy to be a founder. You got to be a crazy person to go work for an early stage company, particularly one if it's undercapitalized. If you're an investor, you got to be a little crazy because there's other ways to make money besides investing in unproven startups. So the places where these people hang out are co-working spaces. Obviously the Accelerators, they have established cohorts and they have mentor groups. The Incubators, these are places where they hang out. The most governments, local and national, have some kind of enterprise network where they've got a whole base of people who literally are paid to help you with your business plan, with your networking. So you just try to maximize the likelihood that you're going to collide, essentially, with people who like the idea, are willing to invest both time, energy, and reputation to help you get where you want to go. And I cannot stress enough, it's a numbers game. One of the best ways to get access to the kind of people that you're trying to get access to is through referrals from people that are already working on your behalf. So deal lawyers, people that see a lot of deal flow, accountants see a lot of deal flow. If you're in a market that has some kind of a venture debt institution, they see tons of deal flow. Advisory boards. In my experience, an advisory board can be extremely valuable, particularly in the early stages. And if you assemble an advisory board that's diverse, so you don't want everyone from the same industry, so diverse, and you incent the advisory board, you can do it with options. Doesn't have to be a lot, but give them some upside. And then you respect their time. So if you call an advisory board meeting, you have a defined schedule, you circulate information beforehand, give them a free lunch, give the presentation, and ask for constructive feedback, including an opportunity for the advisory board to debate. Now, I'm not saying your advisory board is like a Trojan horse in the sense that you would expect your advisory board to necessarily be angel investors in your company, but it's not uncommon, to be honest, that the advisors, as time goes by, start to fall in love with the idea. And it has been my experience that not only do advisory boards frequently participate in early stage financing, they also lead to other investors to participate in that. So if you pick your advisory board wisely, you can not only get invaluable strategic advice, you frankly may be able to get access to your first round of funding or introductions to later sources of funding at a later point in time. One of the things that I see a lot that's a issue is the concept of finders. So sticking with the fishing analogy, let's say that you want to fish where the fish are. It's not uncommon for fishermen to employ a fish finder, right? Or a guide, somebody who knows where the fish are. Is that a good idea? And the answer is, it depends. In the US, the answer's probably not, because in the US, the SEC used to be kind of a gray area, but honestly, it's not that gray. It's pretty much black and white. If you are not registered as a broker-dealer, you can't accept any form of compensation for introducing somebody in connection with the sale of securities. And it doesn't matter if you try and hide it and call them something other than a finder. The reality is that's the law. Now, if you do it, what are the consequences? Well, in the old days, it was, it's just an unenforceable contract and maybe we don't have to pay the fee. The SEC is like, no, it's actually worse than that. It can result in the loss of the exemption under registration, which means that you could be subject to what's called a right of rescission, which means instead of selling equity, you've essentially sold debt bearing interest. That is, the investors have the right to get their money back with interest, all because you used a finder. So long and the short is, if you're based in the US, you don't want to do it. Now, what about other jurisdictions? I mean, I've lived in a number of countries, and in some of those countries, it's not illegal. I mean, it's really not an ethical issue, it's a legal issue. So it doesn't seem like paying somebody a fee to introduce you to, people do it in real estate and other areas. But within the securities area, bottom line is, some countries, the answer is it's okay, but you better know the answer to that question. And so accordingly, having a securities lawyer on your team who can answer that question and give you the comfort is really important. So how does this operate in practice? Well, again, usually somebody who's desperate to raise capital will do virtually anything to get it. And there are people who say, yeah, I've got a Rolodex and I can introduce you to some. And I was involved with a startup. It was a Danish startup. And it's not actually illegal, at least it wasn't at that time, to pay a finder's fee in Denmark. And so these people were doing a perfectly legitimate business. The problem was we were marketing the securities globally. And we had investors in USA and the UK and India and Denmark and all over the place. So if you engage this finder and the finder's based in Denmark, but the investors are in other jurisdictions, is it okay? Because it's legal in Denmark. And the answer is no. You probably won't get into trouble necessarily for the investments that were made in Denmark. So maybe you can pay a fee in Denmark, but these guys, they put a lot of work in, and so they want to get paid on the global deal. And if it turns out that it's not legal, for example, in the United States, it blows the exemption in the United States. And like I said, that can lead to rescission. So it's just not a good idea. So you need a coordinated strategy that complies with law in all the jurisdictions. And that's what I've learned. I've seen this over and over, and it's a tough issue. I wish the US would change the law, but until they do that, it is what it is. What do you got to do if you are fortunate enough to get a call or a meeting? And by the way, meetings are better than calls, although meetings take more time on both your part and their part. So actually, in some cases, sometimes a quick call is better to qualify the lead. But what do you got to do? Well, we talked about the toolkit. And so if you've got that toolkit, working within that shouldn't take up too much time. But before you have the call and the opportunity to present, it's my view that less is more. So say a three paragraph description that can be communicated in an email or a calendar invite, just to give people a nutshell of what it is that you're doing, together with the one pager. That's enough to whet their appetite to see whether they want to take the meeting or the call. If you get into the call or the meeting, and by the way, if you're doing the meeting, I'd strongly recommend that you use one of the video conferencing capabilities, Zoom or whatever, Skype, I guess, but something that's high quality, preferably with screen sharing capabilities. That is where you would want to be respectful of their time. So for some people, what are they going to give you? 30 minutes? 60 minutes? I mean, to be honest, 60 minutes is on the long side. So first and foremost, you need to understand how much time do we have? And then you tailor your pitch to give you enough time to present the big idea and also to engage in a conversation. So I'm not here to say that the pitch has to be exactly 15 minutes, but if you've only got a 30-minute phone call, by the time you do the pleasantries and the pitch, honestly, you want to give yourself at least 10 minutes for Q&A. If you got an hour, obviously you can get into a longer discussion, but respecting their time is extremely important. And even if they haven't said, hey, look, I got to get off, it's important that you respect other people's times. That's big, because on both sides of the deal, they're taking a lot of meetings, looking at a lot of potential deals. After the call, it really depends on how did the call go. At a minimum, you're going to obviously want to send a thank you note. And that thank you note can be kind of canned and then customized. Should be pretty short and sweet, delivered preferably within one business day. And then what else should be attached to that? Well, if it turns out you think that there's interest, then you would want to attach some additional supplemental materials regarding next steps. And if you really are ready with a compelling offer, particularly if you have an ongoing offering and you already have traction on that offer, then you definitely want to ask for the sale. And that includes all the materials. All you got to do is, sign this subscription agreement, or, if it's a term sheet thing, this is the proposed terms. If you don't have a signed term sheet and you just want to kind of float, these are the general idea of it, that's better in my view than nothing, because both parties should know, I would think, within one meeting, whether there's a potential for a real deal here. And so it's incumbent on you to be respectful of their time and put something in their court that they can respond to. Different people have different ways of doing this. Some salespeople are better than others. I would simply say this: it is a numbers game. And so on the front end of the funnel, the key is to make sure that you have enough good leads and qualified leads, and then you just got to run through it. And I'm from Seattle, and I remember in the early days of the 90s, Starbucks was just taking off, and there was a ton of coffee companies in Seattle. So Starbucks was not founded by Howard Schultz. It's actually founded by 3 other guys who later founded Pete's. But Howard Schultz essentially came up with a scalable retail concept. And when he was out raising money for that, I'm told it took him 72 meetings before he got his first $50,000 commitment. Think about that. 71 times he met, pitched the story, and heard, no thank you. But he kept going. And I just read in preparing for this that he said that in the first year, when he was trying to raise the first round of capital, less than $2 million, he met with something like 242 investors. And of that, I think I read that 217 of them said no. Okay, now, since that time, of course, there's been great success for that brand in terms of raising capital and scaling the business. But all I can say is, if somebody who's that charismatic spent that much time with that many no's, think about what it takes for the average entrepreneur. And I'm not here to say that you're going to have to pitch it 100 times before you get to yes, but it might take 200. So the key is, it's a numbers game, and be respectful to the other side because they're investing their time just by having a meeting, and be respectful to yourself, and don't sell yourself short. Since I created this first video and started doing some research, we created the video in August, and I had, I think, about 800 people took a quiz, and about close to 200 people scheduled a free call where I was doing research to figure out about how hard is it to raise capital over here in Europe. And one of the more compelling, I thought, entrepreneurs was somebody who was from Poland with a really good tech focused startup in a hot space, cybersecurity space, and a good team, and actually pilot customers. So pretty much everything you're looking for. And I said, well, how long have you been raising capital? He goes, God, like a year. And I just haven't found anyone. And I'm like, a year? Wow, that's a long time. I said, so how many meetings have you had? And he said, 5. I was like, 5? I mean, seriously. You couldn't raise capital in Silicon Valley, probably, with 5 meetings. I mean, you do need to kiss a lot of frogs to find the prince. In my experience, you just need to get up every morning and not be depressed about the fact that, yesterday and last week you got no's, because today might be a different day. Now, there is a tipping point in venture finance. And so one of the keys is to try and find somebody who really is a leader. And if you can do that, then you can start to load people onto the train. As people start to get onto the train, you blow that whistle. Hey, train is leaving the station. And people want to know, oh, well, who else is in? And if they find out, oh, well, it's, leaders, people that might know more than me, or people that are savvy, well, I want to end on that deal. So people, just like sheep, they start getting on the train. And dirty little secret for angels is you want to be the last guy in the train if you can. Because at that point, other people have done the due diligence, so you're kind of a little bit of a free rider, but that's okay. If it takes, a village to fill out a round, then your goal is to find the very best fit, the smartest investors, not necessarily the ones that are going to give you the best deal. It's the people that are going to be able to help you build the most value. And that's what, in my experience, the smartest entrepreneurs I've worked with do. They look to bring in people that can add value. And so your investors are a partner. They're not just a source of money, they're a partner. And so you're going to have to get out there, just like, dating. You need to go on a few dates before you might find your soulmate. But this really is it's an important relationship, and it's not one to be taken lightly. A common question for people who are thinking that they might want to, quote, test the waters, and by the way, I don't like that term. It's either you're going to do it or you're not. But some people say, well, what if I test the waters? How long would it take? And the answer is, it depends. In my experience, and I've been doing this for almost 30 years, it would be an extremely rare case where from start to finish, you could do it in less than 30 days. Even if you have your house in order. Frankly, even if you have a signed term sheet, it's hard to close a VC deal in 30 days or less. There's usually a period of due diligence, and the lawyers got to get on board. So 30 days would be, a very, very small percentage of people that can do it. More commonly, it's going to take, and this is again, if you have your house in order and you're really organized, 3 months to 6 months. That's my view. Now, what's the average? I would say if you're really organized, 3-4 months is very doable if you know what you're doing. Now, what if you're pitching this deal and 9 months later you still haven't closed? To be honest, that's not time to say uncle. It's time to buckle up and figure out how to bootstrap it. You might have to go back to your friends and family. You might need to think of other ways, but really what the market is saying is you don't have enough traction. They're not saying no, they're just saying not yet. You haven't proven it. You don't have product market fit. Your prototype is kind of cool, but it doesn't work. I've been involved with companies that raise significant amount of capital on a prototype, hardware, and didn't work. So getting the next round of financing was really difficult because the company had a prototype that didn't work. So it is important at each stage of the venture that you can prove, okay, if you give us the capital, this is what we can do for some period of time. Now, so this gets back to how long does it take to close the first round, and how much time should you give yourself for the next round? And I would say, in traditional tech finance, you typically want to not raise capital more than once every 18 to 24 months. I mean, once you take down the capital, you want to do something with it. You want to prove that you've achieved something and taken it to a step up in valuation before you go back to market. Otherwise, you get this really kind of weird sort of drip feed thing, and it's not optimal for the investors or for the company. Another thing I wanted to talk about in this is, is this masterclass US-centric? And the short answer is kinda, it is. Why? Because I spent the first 20 years of my life working on the West Coast in the United States doing startup and venture capital and emerging growth companies. And so that's where I cut my teeth. Now, since 2010, I've lived outside the United States. I spent 4 years in Denmark working the startup and emerging growth ecosystem really throughout Northern Europe, not just Denmark, but throughout the Nordics and Northern Europe and over in Ireland and the UK. And that informed me on the nuances and the differences. There's clearly differences between how the startup ecosystem works in, say, Stockholm from how it works in Seattle. And for that matter, there's differences between Stockholm and Copenhagen, or Berlin and France. Now, people who live in Europe, this isn't very surprising that these ecosystems and the negotiating styles and the cultures are different. languages are different. But for people like me living in the United States, they may not appreciate the subtleties, or frankly, in some cases, not so subtle differences. Now, the unfortunate thing about a lot of this information is it is US-centric. So if you go online and do a Google search, there's tons of information that's available in the English language. But most of that information is US-centric. And so I guess the question for those of you who don't live in the United States and are watching this is it relevant? And I guess what I would like to think is that the general principles are relevant. And there is probably some localized version of pretty much everything that I've spoken about here, which isn't to say that there aren't differences. And particularly when you get into sort of sources of funding that governments can provide, because some of these countries have fantastic programs. I think of Enterprise Ireland, or I think of Finland, or and other, the Nordic countries all have great government support for innovation and entrepreneurship. And so those are clearly local, and those should be explored. So when you think about how you're going to approach the investors, although everything that I've said today I stand behind as a general rule, no doubt, no matter, depending on where you live, there's probably other kinds of investors, some of whom may behave slightly different because they're just a product of a different culture.